welcome to the 9th annual IoTSF Conference. I hope you all know that this is the longest running dedicated conference on IoT security anywhere in the world. Indeed, we started back in 2015 when we did our IoT Security Summit at Bletchley Park. So delighted to see that the UK government have been taking notes. My name is John Moor. I'm the Managing Director of the IoT Security Foundation. I just want to thank you all for those who have travelled in today, especially those who have flown in, and I would like to say a big warm welcome to the people who are on the live stream. Right, get the clicker. I want to start by saying a big thank you to everybody who's represented on the slide. I know it's a cliche, but we really could not do what we're doing today without the support of all of these people, whether you're in the exhibition or you're a sponsor. I would particularly like to say a big thank you to our platinum sponsors, which are Crypto Quantique and Sakama. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to Device Authority, who are our headline sponsor. Device Authority have sponsored several of our conferences, so we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Just before we get into the proceedings, there's some messages that I would like to share with you. Just the key messages, not everything, but just really to help give you some idea how we got to today. First thing I wanted to talk about was chapters. It was back in 2019 when we had a board meeting, and the executive steering board said, let's have a look at what impact we're having on IoT security. Are we living up to our mantra? Are we living up to our mission to make it safe to connect? And the question was, how could we go further? How could we go faster? And so we made a strategic decision at that point, also driven by our members, to start our chapters program. Now, you'll know that the timing wasn't perfect. We went through a pandemic. I'm delighted to say we had our very first chapter started in Bucharest during the pandemic, but things slowed a little thereafter. This year we've made some really important progress. So in April, we announced our very first chapter in India, in Bangalore. Hello to anybody who's watching from there. They've had a couple of events. They had an initial introduction event, and just last month they had their very first full conference, which I wasn't there, but I understand was a resounding success. So thank you to IoTSF Bangalore, helping to propagate the mantra of IoT security best practice. In May, we announced our very first US chapter in Houston, and hopefully we've got some people from Houston watching. They've had several virtual events, and just this next week, they've got their very first physical event on November the 9th. We'd like to keep that momentum going. We're having some conversations with people around the world about opening a chapter in various cities, but if there's anybody here today in the audience or on the live stream who would help us propagate security best practice, then please consider starting a chapter. The chapters are a grassroots activity, which means they are driven by members. You set the agenda, you set the tone, you set the themes. We don't dictate that. At the beginning of the year, we started our webinar series hosted by my colleague Chris Benison. We have the webinars the last Thursday of every month. If you've missed any of those, for those of you who are members, you can catch up with all of the back catalogue on our website. The next one is on November the 30th, and for those of you who have been astute, you may have noticed that we originally announced Paul from NCSC as a speaker today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but he's very happy to do the next webinar. So thank you, Paul, for that. Also, a call out. If there's anybody who's got anything pressing they'd like to share with us, we're always looking for good talks. So if you want to speak on the webinar, please contact us, especially Chris. At the very heart of what we do are the working groups. The working groups come together, they discuss a subject, and they produce materials. It was somewhat interesting for me to but to just make the observation that we'd never had a working group on regulation. And why that was interesting for me is because since we started in 2015, we have influenced, we have fed into numerous regulation processes around the world, especially here in the UK. So this year we started a regulatory group. We started that in the summer. It's still bedding in, but before it's even bedded in, it's already started to have an impact. So we're already feeding into the Radio Equipment Directive. There's a talk on that later today. We're also looking at producing a paper for the C-suite for the UK's PSTI Act, which comes into full force in April next year. For those who have been following us, you'll know our special interest in the router, the hub, the gateway, not least of which because it is an attack point for bad actors, but also it's somewhere we can actually layer and provision good security. So the Many Secured Working Group is where we do that activity. That is in full flight. We also have a project looking at secure networking by design, which is funded by the DSBD program. You'll hear some of that today. We also have a group which is more focused on the users of IoT, the Smart Built Environment Group. I'll not say too much about that because there is a session on that again later in the agenda, but suffice to say the program there got hit by the pandemic, but I'm delighted to say that that group is now really starting to take off once again. And then the last two are really at the core of where we started, the Assurance Framework and the Secure Design Best Practices Group. And there's a call out here to any members who are interested to get involved in those groups, especially those of you who think you might want to chair or lead that group. Trevor Hall, who's been the chair of the Assurance Framework Group for some time, took over from Chris Shire, is stepping down next year, and we're looking for a new chair. And I think Jeff also could do with some help, so a bit of a call out there for any members who are interested to participate in that. The working groups produce our materials, whether it's a white paper, a best practice guide, maybe an opinion piece. I said last year that we were going to produce something from the Smart Building Group, and that's what we did. We produced the Facilities Manager's Best Practice Guide. We also produced a paper on the Software Bill of Materials. And what we do when we set those groups up, we give them a challenge. We ask them to produce AAA rated documentation. And the AAA in our parlance is they need to be accessible. So for the audience that they're intended for, they need to be consumable. Of course, they need to be authoritative, because we are the expert and it's all about providing expertise. But crucially, they need to be actionable. In my time as the MD of IoTSF, I've read a lot of guidance on IoT security, and it's generally good. But the thing that a number of them are missing is you say to yourself, great, now what? The guidance we give for the working groups is there must be some actionable points that people can take out of that. Last year, when I stood up on stage, I announced that we'd hit the 50,000 mark for our downloads, a number that we're all very proud of. I'm delighted to tell you that this year we've gone over 61,000 downloads, and we're looking to push that more. And I look at the web stats every month, and I always look at how they're faring, and it's really interesting to see that the very core of what we do, the assurance framework, still hits at least 100 downloads every month, and followed on the heels with the security best practice guide. The newer guides haven't had that tenure yet, but they are growing in providence. So thank you to everybody who has contributed to those documents. Today, we publish the next in the series of our vulnerability disclosure report. This is the 6th in the series. We initially started this off because we wanted to have a litmus test to see what industry was doing. Is there a simple test that we could see engage industry and their security posture? The initial report found that only 10% of the cohort that we looked at had a vulnerability disclosure policy. Now, what's really changed since then is that reporting and vulnerability disclosure is a common element in every piece of regulation that we've seen around the globe. So we think it's a very good litmus test. For anybody who is here that is a manufacturer, I want you to do one thing, well, more than one thing, but one thing in this specific instance. I want you to download that report. I want you to go to the back. There are 3 annexes there. There's a green list, there's an amber list, and there's a red list. I want to check to see if your company is on the red list. If it's on the red list, then you are effectively on notice that you may be the subject of the regulators, because we could not find, or the researchers could not find, a disclosure policy, and that will be part of the regulation. Oh, I should say there is a talk to discuss the findings later today. David Rogers and Rohan are here. They led the research, so that will be here later this afternoon. Okay, a little bit of fun. Last year, when I stood up, I said to you, memory safety is a thing. So I thought I would extend the it's a thing in the IoTSF conference. Here are some of the things that certainly I've noticed becoming more prominent as we've gone through the year. And I've tried to break them down, very broadly speaking, of what you can do up front by design, and then what happens once you get into operation. So on the design thing, memory safety still is very much a thing. We're very proud to be part of the UK's Digital Security by Design programme. The platform that's used in that is based on the ARM Morello. I'm delighted to see that we're also seeing commercial offerings coming through now from the RISC-V community. So that's a really good development. What we would really like to see, and I'm inspired by the words of Robert Watson on the last advisory board, where he basically said, we want to see everything memory safe, and we agree with that. The second is zero trust. Zero trust is an emerging field. It's mature in some parts, but it's still very much a concept that I think the industry needs to fully embrace. It's not, when we ask the question, what is it that we're trying to secure, from whom, by what means? I think we need to say, well, we understand what our adversaries look like, but we don't really know where they come from. So zero trust is a thing. And I'll just not say too much, but post-quantum is also bleeping quite a lot on the radar these days. And as I said, once we get into operation, then it's all about resilience. What do you do when things go wrong? So we're big fans of continuous assurance. And by that, what we mean is we need to automate. We cannot scale with IoT on manual processes. So we really need to be thinking about how do we deliver continuous assurance as opposed to certification to make sure that we maintain security throughout the operating life. And I'll put SBOMs as well. SBOMs, when I was first introduced to SBOMs, they were described to me as an ingredients list for software. And that's good, but it turns out they've got much, much more utility. And in some of the projects and the discussions that we've been having at IoTSF, we've been really looking at how we can operationalize that to help reach that lofty goal of continuous assurance. So you'll be hearing more about that today. And of course, I think it was about a year ago when ChatGPT really hit mainstream that AI has become a thing. And of course, it's the subject of the conference today. Indeed, I'll let you into a secret. We came up with the name of the conference. We chose 3 common chatbots. We asked it what we should name the conference, and I'm delighted to say that Bard won. Bard gave us the name of the conference. But this is the moment each year. This is the 9th time. It's the moment that I stop and I reflect on what we've done and what we're doing. And I ask myself, actually, what is it we do at IoTSF? What is it that we aspire to be? And I always go back to the discussions we had back in 2015 when we talked about what we could do, what we didn't want to do. Fundamentally, we wanted to look at IoT security in the round because, as it says there, the way we see IoT is independent, interdependent, complex system of systems with no guiding mind, and it's forever changing. So you cannot just do one piece. We'd like to look at it in the round. And what we wanted to do was create a home for IoT security. And that is just recognizing that this thing needs a lot of players, a lot of actors, but we want it to be a place where anybody needed to know about IoT security, they could come to. So importantly, we need to make sure our actions are impactful. We didn't want to just be a talking shop. By its very nature, we're collaborative. Everything we do is collaborative, locally and globally. And that's the last point. We really need to extend this globally. Cybersecurity doesn't stop at the borders, hence our activity with our chapters. Now, this may seem a bit of an odd place to put this up before we've even really got today started, but we're already thinking about next year. I mentioned that this is the 9th annual conference. Next year will be our 10th. That will be a milestone. So we want to give everybody as much heads up as possible. We want to do something special. We're not quite sure what that is yet, but we hope that some of our members will help us decide on that. So put the date in your diary. We're targeting October 23rd. That's to be confirmed, but it will certainly be that week. Right, that's enough from me. Let's get started proper. The diagram on the left-hand side there is my floor plan of the sessions for today. As you can see at the top, we get started off as a plenary session, everybody here in the Kelvin Theatre. Then, after the break, you've got the choice of 2 tracks. An IoTSF conference wouldn't be an IoTSF conference without having a very strong offering in security best practice, both contemporary and emerging. So we've got 3 full sessions. That's in the Turing Theatre. And in here, in the Kelvin Theatre, the next session will be Future Foundations by Design. And then after lunch, we'll come back in Emerging Threats in the Smart Built Environment. And then finally, we'll do the Regulation Countdown. And at the end of the day, we'll all come back in here and we'll do some wrap-up messages. And I hope that some of you, most of you, will stay and have a drink with us at the end. Here are the faces of the people who will be part of the program today. I think I've got everybody. Apologies if I haven't. But as you can see, there's a lot of experience there, a lot of knowledge, and I hope that you have a very good day where you learn things, meet new people, and think about IoT security.